20 years later, case of 5 accused of plotting 9/11 terrorist attacks remains stalled. On the eve of the 20th anniversary of the September 11 terrorist attacks, pretrial hearings in the 9-year-long case against 5 men accused of plotting and executing the attacks continued in a heavily guarded military courtroom in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. While the hearings this week were the first to be held in person for a year and a half because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the case that aims to provide family members of the nearly 3,000 victims of September 11 with justice remains hamstrung by personnel changes and dozens of outstanding motions. In the first week of in-person pretrial hearings since February 2020, lawyers spent time in court asking the latest in a series of judges about his experience and knowledge of the issues in the years-long case, including torture and the death penalty. In the last hearing of the week on Friday, lawyers debated one of several outstanding motions about what evidence defense attorneys will get from the U.S. government regarding the time the detainees spent in CIA custody in undisclosed locations, known as black sites, in the early 2000s. The 5 accused, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who has been dubbed the mastermind behind the attacks, have been detained and imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay since 2006. While the men were arraigned in 2012 during the Obama administration, the case has dragged on for years. There are dozens of outstanding motions, and lawyers on both the prosecution and defense teams have come and gone in the almost decade of litigation. 4 judges have presided over in-person hearings in the case, including the latest judge to take it on, Judge Col. Matthew McCall, an Air Force judge. A fresh-faced judge. Whether or not McCall should preside over the case has been a major subject at the pretrial hearings this week as lawyers from both sides questioned his suitability. The prosecution objected to McCall's initial appointment in October 2020 because he did not have the required 2 years of experience needed to preside over a military commission case. McCall recused himself after that, because he did not want to be the reason the case was held up any longer, he said in court this week. He was later reappointed by the military to the case in August, after he had acquired 2 years of experience as a judge. Both prosecuting attorneys representing the U.S. government and defense attorneys representing the detainees questioned McCall about his experience and background knowledge of issues in the case. Because this is a military commission, judges are appointed by the military and are a part of the military. They serve specific terms when they are given postings. All 5 detainees could face the death penalty, and all 5 were brutally tortured. The effects of torture are only always in the room, ʟᴇᴅ, lead counsel for Mohammed, said on Wednesday. Those are things we deal with on a day-to-day basis. All 5 men suffer from different health issues because of the torture they endured while in CIA custody, according to their lawyers. McCall said he did not have experience working on a case involving torture but said he did have experience working with clients who had experienced trauma because he worked on many military sexual assault cases. He did not display a deep knowledge of the issues surrounding the case, saying he had not read the Congressional 9/11 Commission report or the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence report about CIA detention and interrogation, both released during the Obama administration. McCall also said he did not know about the legal history of the death penalty, but that he plans to take a course on it this fall. McCall has not read all of the thousands of pages of legal documents associated with his new case, he told attorneys when asked. David Bruck, who recently became the lead defense attorney for detainee Ramzi bin al-Shibh, accurately summed up the 2 paths McCall's career could take if he remains the presiding judge for the case. Bruck said McCall could either be the judge who unties the Gordian knot of the 9/11 case, bring it to trial and bring justice to the family members of victims who died in the terror attacks, or it could go down the other road, where the case went nowhere and it happened on your watch. When Bruck asked McCall if he was aware of this, McCall gave a solemn nod and quietly said, "Yes, sir." Still debating evidence. After attorneys had a chance to object to McCall presiding over the case, 3 defense attorneys objected. 1 did not object. 1 deferred and the prosecution did not object. McCall began debate on one of the many outstanding motions in the case, about how much detail defense attorneys will be able to get from the U.S. government regarding interrogations of the detainees while they were in CIA custody at so-called black sites. When you are hanging from the ceiling for days on end. You don't know what's happened, Cheryl Borman, lead counsel for Walid Mohammed Saleh Mubarak bin Attash, said in court, referring to torture he was subjected to when he was in CIA custody. The fact that attorneys are still arguing over what evidence they can have access to 9 years into pretrial hearings demonstrates how far this case is from being resolved, and how far away its original intended mission, to bring justice to family members of 9/11 victims, feels. I pretty much stopped making trial estimates because every single one I've ever made has been wrong. But there's no real scenario of getting to trial before 2 years, said James Connell, lead attorney for Ali Abdul Aziz Ali, who has worked on the case since 2012. Family members of 9/11 victims sat in the gallery at the back of the military courtroom during the 3 hearings held this week, separated from the media and other observers in the gallery by a blue curtain. The Army Brief, Review of Afghan War, Disinformation Attacks, Pandemic Costs, and more. Afghanistan Review. Army Chief of Staff General James McConville wants a review of lessons learned from the Afghan War and the fall of Kabul, Defense One reports. While he's proud of the service of soldiers in the war, he said a hard look is still needed into the conflict's outcome. No indoctrination. General McConville also dismissed claims that the military is trying to indoctrinate service members on critical race theory, Defense One reports. What we're trying to build is teams where everyone treats everyone with respect, he said. Pandemics are expensive. The coronavirus pandemic has already cost the Pentagon at least $13.6 billion and is expected to grow as the military increases the testing of civilian employees, Defense One reports. About $7.1 billion has gone to reimburse defense companies for their pandemic-related expenses. Sign up to get the Army Brief every Friday morning from Caitlin M. Kenny, Defense One's military services reporter. On September 11, 1941, construction of the Pentagon began. Decades later, renovations that were happening in the building in 2001 are believed to have saved lives in the attack, as some of the offices impacted were empty and the walls and windows had been upgraded. Army Chief calls for Afghanistan review. Let the cards fall where they fall, McConville says lessons must be learned because terrorism is not going away. The Army's Chief of Staff wants a review of the decisions that led to the fall of Kabul and the U.S. military's withdrawal. The last few weeks have been heartbreaking for soldiers who fought there, including members of his own family, Army Chief of Staff Gen. James McConville said during the Defense One State of Defense event, his first extensive public comments since the war's end. Let the cards fall where they fall. But the general also stressed that the Army and Americans concerned about forever wars should be prepared for infinite competition against terrorism and nation-states, and that leaders should reconsider what happens when American forces who have trained and supported foreign armies are pulled out. The capacity was there, McConville said of the Afghan armed forces who eventually gave up, and so was the equipment. But, he continued, did they have the will to fight, after 20 years? I think that's a lesson to be learned, he said. The thing I've also learned in my time in Afghanistan, is, with many of our allies and partners, when American troops are on the ground with them, they will fight. And, you know what happens after we're gone? We have to take a look at it. President Joe Biden's decision to withdraw all U.S. forces, the collapse of Afghanistan's government, and the disintegration of Afghan armed forces that Americans had spent billions to train and equip have sparked worldwide criticism and commentary about the worth of the entire war. As Taliban leaders in Kabul begin to establish a government of once-wanted terrorists that Americans were fighting just weeks ago, McConville said he hopes U.S. soldiers remain proud of their service. We know why we went to Afghanistan. We went to Afghanistan because Osama bin Laden attacked our country and killed thousands of innocent Americans. Al-Qaeda was a terrorist force that had pledged to continue to try to kill Americans, ʟCOnville said. So we went to Afghanistan to hold Osama bin Laden accountable, and that mission was accomplished. ʟCOnville said Afghanistan benefited and was improved because of those missions. They did their job. They did extremely well, they served their country during a time of conflict, and I am personally very proud of what they did, and they should be too, ʟCOnville said. The general said his 2 sons, daughter, and a son-in-law all served in Afghanistan. Asked whether the war was a failure, ʟCOnville said, "We need to take a look at what the outcome was. There's gonna be a lot of folks that will say certain things. I think we need to take a hard look at it. For now," he said, "the army has been tied up executing the evacuation from Kabul, facilitated largely by soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division. Beyond Kabul," ʟCOnville said the United States and the Army will have to continue preparing for and fighting terrorism. Terrorism is not going away, ʟCOnville said, at least in my eyes. There's groups of people out there who have committed to wanting to kill Americans and if they have the opportunity, to attack our homeland. So we need to be cognizant of that. We need to work very closely with our allies and partners, because we all share the same goal. To me, these terrorists are almost like a cancer, And sometimes they go into remission, and it kind of slows down, but they can come back. And when they come back they are committed to harming a country." The chief said the U.S. military still has a role to retain capabilities that break terrorism groups and to help allies with counter-terrorism and intelligence sharing, seeming to caution against turning backs away from one mission for the sake of great power competition. I see the future. When I take a look at where the Army's going and transforming, we're certainly cognizant of the strategic competition that's happening in the world with places like China and in Russia, and we're certainly concerned about Iran and North Korea. But the violent extremist threat, in my eyes, it's not going away, and we need to have the appropriate forces committed to that to make sure they don't attack our homeland." ʟCOnville bristled at the rhetorical use of "forever wars," but described a similar frame for the global security threats the U.S. Army faces. "I think we're going to have infinite competition," ʟCOnville said. "There's always some type of competition going on in the world that we have to participate in and we would hope that would not get to conflict. And it's the same thing with terrorism and violent extremist groups. We would hope they wouldn't be positioned to attack the United States. And again, that becomes a strategy. How do you get after and how do you guard against organizations that are committed to killing Americans? We need to have the capability, and it's not always a military solution." ʟCOnville said there are 3 end-state conditions the U.S. needs to pay attention to before going into another conflict: a source of security, a government, and economic development. And as we look at the lessons learned, let's look at all decisions, let's put them on the table. The way we get better is doing very detailed after-action reviews, and then let the cards fall where they fall." Quote,